The gnarled trees lining Oakwood Drive twisted their branches towards the sky, casting long shadows that crept along the asphalt like silent sentinels. It was the kind of street that looked charming in a way that almost dared you to disrupt its painted perfection. Each house stood as a testament to suburban uniformity, their beige facades blending into a seamless panorama of order and expectation. I had chosen this neighborhood for its steady predictability, the kind that promised peace and quiet. But peace, I was soon to learn, was as fragile as a spider's web by the window. It began with a simple letter from the HOA, a piece of paper that landed with an officious thud in my mailbox. My transgression? Painting my front door a shade of red that apparently offended the delicate sensibilities of one Karen Whitmore. She was the self-appointed guardian of our little enclave's visual monotony. Her power lay not in her title, but in her relentless pursuit of conformity. Karen was a force of nature, not unlike a storm that brewed on the horizon with an inevitable, ominous crawl. Her displeasure was the wind that rustled the leaves in warning, subtle yet insistent. I never saw her approach, but her influence was felt in the way neighbors would glance furtively at my door, their eyes skimming over it like a dirty secret. The red was not just a color. It was a statement, a vibrant defiance against the tyranny of taupe and eggshell. I'd chosen it deliberately, a splash of warmth in the encroaching blandness. Karen's letter arrived like an autumn chill, crisp and efficient, demanding rectification. Non-compliance, it read, as if my door were a criminal lurking in plain sight. Her first move was subtle, an invitation to a neighborhood meeting that was anything but cordial. She laid out her case with the precision of a surgeon, dissecting my choice with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her voice was smooth, syrupy with false concern, the kind that dripped from her lips like honey laced with poison. The other residents nodded along, caught in the undertow of her persuasiveness. I responded with silence, an unyielding stillness that spoke louder than words. I would not be swept away by her current. The red stayed, a beacon amidst the sea of sameness. Autumn deepened, and with it, Karen's tactics grew sharper. The notices became more frequent, each one more insistent than the last. She was relentless, like a hawk circling its prey with single-minded focus. Her eyes never left the door, a crimson affront to her perfectly curated world. And then, the air turned crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and anticipation. Halloween approached, bringing with it an opportunity. The thought was unbidden, yet once it took root, it blossomed with an inevitability that was both thrilling and terrifying. I would paint not just my door, but the entire street. The days ticked by, and my resolve hardened like the frost that began to lace the edges of the windows. I watched as Karen's frustration grew, a visible knot in the fabric of her carefully controlled demeanor. She had no idea what was coming, the irony of it all unfurling like a secret whispered on the wind. The night before Halloween, I stood on my porch, the air thick with the promise of mischief. This was no act of vandalism, it was art, a transformation. And as the first brush strokes of morning light crept over the horizon, I knew Oakwood Drive was about to become a canvas for change. The October chill seeped through the neighborhood like a quiet warning. Each blade of grass seemed to whisper secrets, and even the wind carried a certain knowingness, its breath rustling through the bare branches. I stood at my window, observing the perfect rows of houses, each one an echo of the next, each door a muted variation of beige or gray. The grip of conformity was tight here. Predictable. Safe. That is, until my defiance had painted its first stroke with that rebellious red door. But the committee, with its rules as brittle as the autumn leaves, couldn't allow a single note of defiance to disturb their symphony of sameness. Yet, this was no longer just about a door. It was about the rigidity of their absurdities. The citations came like clockwork, each one more ridiculous than the last. Trash cans visible from the street, they claimed, as if plastic bins were the harbingers of chaos. Grass length exceeding regulations, they noted, a crime against their manicured reality. Still, I watched, noticed the sly glances exchanged across driveways, the whispered conversations over hedges that spoke volumes without a single word. Gossip, that old and timeless echo, spread quickly. Perhaps it was the red door's fault. Perhaps it was mine. There was power in observation, though. Power in understanding the game they played, in knowing that their need for control was their own undoing. It swelled within me, a quiet determination that crept into my bones, setting them alight with resolve. Halloween was approaching, carrying with it promises of mischief and masks, the perfect cloak for my intentions. I would give them what they feared most, a small chaos, a splash of color in their monochrome world, a taste of the unpredictable. The days grew shorter, the shadows longer. Each evening, I imagined the street bathed in red, a wave of rebellion cascading across the pavement and sidewalks. It would be a masterpiece of irony, a street painted red not by my hand alone, but by the acceptance of tradition twisted on its head. And so I began, quietly at first, a suggestion here, a whispered idea there, woven into the fabric of community meetings and casual conversations, planting seeds of doubt and curiosity, a gentle push towards embracing the festive spirit in a way that only I truly understood. As the day approached, the neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. There was no need for grand declarations or overt actions. I let their own imaginations do the work, each neighbor wondering what the others might do, each thinking the idea was theirs alone. Finally, when Halloween arrived, the street came alive with flickering lights and shadowed figures. As dusk settled, a sea of red began to unfurl, doors adorned with crimson wreaths, red lanterns casting ghostly glows. Even the children, unaware of the greater scheme, ran about with ruby-tinted masks and capes. In their frenzy, they had unknowingly painted the street red. The irony was delicious. Their unity forged in defiance of their own pettiness, a quiet rebellion masked as celebration. I watched from my porch, the chill biting at my skin, and smiled. They had taught me well, that sometimes all it takes to upend the status quo is a gentle push, a nudge towards chaos dressed as tradition. The red door had been only the beginning. Here, in this moment, the street was ours. And for now, that was enough. Crimson dawn broke over the neighborhood, painting the street with an eerie glow that echoed the bold, defiant strokes of my handiwork. Overnight, the mundane rows of weathered pastel homes had transformed into a vivid panorama where rebellion met artistry. The world outside my window seemed alive, pulsing with the fiery spirit of Halloween. I watched from my porch, nestled in the quiet comfort of my wicker chair, sipping tea as the waking world began to notice. The first to emerge were the early morning dog walkers, usually wrapped in their own sleepy haze. Their steps faltered, eyes widening as they took in the spectacle. Whispers carried on the crisp autumn breeze, gathering like fallen leaves. My heart drummed a steady rhythm, a symphony of anticipation and satisfaction. Beneath the vibrant layers of paint, the street's personality had shifted. Each house, once indistinguishable from the next, now wore its bold new color with pride. It was as if I had given each home a voice, a means to shout against the monotonous drone of HOA rules. My own door, now a beacon, stood not as an act of defiance, but as a declaration of individuality. An ember in the sea of red. Cars began to slow as they rolled down the street, their occupants craning necks to decipher this vivid anomaly. I imagined the conversations within, the mix of awe and disbelief, the urgent phone calls to neighbors and friends. A movement caught my eye, a figure standing transfixed at the corner. It was Mrs. Horowitz, the self-appointed sentinel of our private utopia. Her posture was a cocktail of disbelief and outrage, frozen in the early light. The irony was delicious. The very enforcer of conformity, now staring at a masterpiece of rebellion. I pondered how Karen, the thorn in my side with her bylaws and fines, would react. Would she see this as a transgression or an avant-garde expression? Likely the former. The thought brought a wry smile to my lips. I let my gaze drift over the scene. The red seemed to flow like lava, reshaping the landscape in its wake. It was uncontainable, a testament to the futility of rigid control. Each brushstroke bore the weight of silent defiance, a quiet roar against a life lived in grayscale. The air thrummed with potential, vibrating like a plucked string, waiting for the inevitable discordance. As the day stretched on, the street buzzed with activity. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, their hushed conversations weaving a tapestry of theory and speculation. Some seemed entranced, others unnerved. Their eyes, drawn to the spectacle, flickered with a mix of fear and fascination. It was a scene out of a surrealist painting, one I had unwittingly brought to life. Beneath the surface, tension simmered like a pot about to boil over. I could sense it in the way people moved, their gestures sharp and deliberate. The anticipation was palpable, a living, breathing entity that fed on the chaos. Yet, amidst the brewing storm, I found solace in the knowledge that I had sparked a conversation, one that transcended the mundane concerns of property values and aesthetic consistency. In that moment, I was a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of chaos and beauty. I took a deep breath, savoring the air, thick with autumnal decay and possibility. The street had become a stage, and I was content to watch the drama unfold. A sudden cry pierced the air, a note of distress that sliced through the morning's quiet. It drew my attention to a small group gathered near the end of the street. There, in the midst of the crowd, stood Karen herself. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief, the embodiment of the storm I had summoned. Our eyes met, a silent clash of wills. In that instant, time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to just the two of us. Her presence was a reminder of the battles fought in silence, the clash of conformity and individuality, a collision of worlds. The street, now a canvas of rebellion, had become the battleground. And as I watched Karen's composure crumble, I realized that this was no longer just about a door. It was about claiming a space in a world that demanded conformity. Red had become the color of revolution, and in that fiery hue I found my voice. The morning after Halloween arrived with a peculiar stillness. Light crept in slowly, like a hesitant visitor unsure of its welcome. The red streets, still fragrant with the faint sugar and spice from the previous night's festivities, glowed under the early sun, a patchwork of hues from amber to crimson. It was as if the neighborhood had been dipped in a watercolor dream, the colors now drying in the cool clarity of dawn. I stood on my porch, inhaling deeply. The air was crisp, tinged with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the lingering, ghostly traces of laughter and mischief. Neighbors emerged one by one, drawn to the spectacle our block had become. There were murmurs, a low hum of disbelief and delight. The audacity of it all, the entire street, painted in rebellion's vivid palette, had somehow transformed into an accidental masterpiece. Karen was conspicuously absent, her curtains drawn tight as the rest of us reconvened in the communal spirit that had been missing for too long. It was as if the red had seeped into our hearts, melting away the barriers she had so meticulously erected. We were talking, sharing glances and smiles, rediscovering the warmth of neighborly camaraderie that had been choked by endless lists of rules and grievances. I felt a lightness, a liberation. The tension that had coiled in my chest for months began to unfurl. It wasn't just about the door or the fines anymore. It was about reclaiming something essential. A voice within whispered a quiet celebration of the small victory, not of paint over regulations, but of community over control. Time drifted, and with it, the street transformed from an art installation back into our daily life. The wet spots dried, leaving behind a softer hue, less shocking, more inviting. Children rode their bicycles through the crimson paths, their laughter echoing like bells. It was a scene from a dream, yet achingly real. As the sun climbed higher, Karen finally emerged. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the street, the people, the new order of things. Her face was a mask of disbelief and reluctant acceptance. This was not a battle she could win, not with paperwork or fines. This was a victory of color and light, of people choosing connection over contention. She walked past me, her expression guarded, lips pressed into a thin line. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment I glimpsed something behind her steely facade, a crack in her armor, a flicker of understanding. Perhaps she realized that power wielded alone is fragile, that in trying to control she had lost touch with the very community she sought to lead. In that silent exchange there was no gloating, no words, just a shared recognition that the street was more beautiful painted red, and that beauty had a way of softening even the hardest of hearts. As the day drew on, the familiarity of routine returned, but with an undercurrent of shared memories and renewed bonds. I watched as neighbors, once isolated by invisible lines, began to linger on each other's porches, cups of coffee in hand, voices carrying with the wind. The street, now a river of red, flowed with life. It was a testament to resilience and rebellion, a mosaic of our dreams and defiance. I smiled, feeling the warmth of community wrap around me like a comforting embrace. And there was peace, a quiet, hard-won peace that painted its own picture.